Greetings, my name is Jessa McLean, and this is Blueprints of Disruption, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the work of the grassroots and sharing the many ways in which we can disrupt the status quo. If you'd like to help us do that, please share our content or perhaps consider becoming a patron of the show. You'll find the links to do that, plus a whole slew of resources that are related to today's content in the show notes. Now, our next guest will share their own origin story. I won't take that from them, but I will tell you that it is a great example of how powerful forces are often born from an act designed to silence and intimidate us. If you've been listening to our show, you'll know this is right. We've seen landlords step too far and inadvertently create a tenant union that ends up on a rent strike. Toronto police crack down on activists, and a robust legal support community is built in response. A hijacked narrative following a tragedy threatened to undo the work of safe injection site activists in Leslieville, and they responded by creating a harm reduction coalition. Now, this isn't to say all our work is reactionary, but to acknowledge that what can feel like a blow, and we get a lot of them, can also be a spark for something much bigger. Today, we're joined by reps for Toronto Palestinian families and Toronto Jewish families, and they're going to take us through their most recent campaign involving the Toronto District School Board and a report that would redefine anti-Semitism in all the ways we've talked about on the show. Before we get to properly introducing our next guests, I'm going to play a clip from one of the delegations. It's a parent from within the Toronto District School Board, and it really does help explain the issues around this report and exactly what its implications could be.
My children and I are Palestinian. We have many family members in Nablus in the West Bank. Our family's history is filled with grief and loss, and my own father was too heartbroken to speak of his trauma to us and his grandchildren. Those feelings of sadness have only deepened as we watched the suffering of Gaza since October 23. We teach our children to be proud of their diverse background. We speak Arabic at home, enjoy all aspects of our rich culture, and of course, cook our favorite Palestinian dishes like maqloube and msakhan, to name a few. Saying that, we don't view Zionism as a symbol of the Jewish faith, but as a political ideology. This ideology has had devastating consequences for Palestinians, including the displacement and ongoing injustices to this day. While Zionism may represent a movement for a Jewish homeland to some, it has consequently inflicted immense pain and trauma on many Palestinian families, including ours. As I volunteer at one of my son's school events, I was subjected to an aggressive and verbally abusive behavior by a Zionist teacher, simply for wearing a symbol of Palestine, which is a necklace that I proudly wear every day, a map of Palestine. I was approached by him in front of kids and other parents. He called me a pro-terrorist, brainwashed, uneducated, fake. My son was definitely affected by this experience, as he had a project to talk about symbols that represent himself. He put his favorite games, songs, sports, hockey teams, Canadian and Lebanese flags, as his dad is Lebanese. But when I asked, where's the Palestinian flag? He simply responded, I don't want to cause any trouble, Mom. I was shocked by his answer. My son should not be seeing his mom harassed for expressing opposing beliefs. My son should not feel he'll get in trouble or cause problems if he expresses pride of his own identity. This new strategy will only create a climate where such incidents may go unreported. Moreover, this strategy dangerously equates Palestinian culture, history, and lived experiences with anti-Semitism. It is an attack and criminalization on our identity and historical truth. I asked the board trustees to review the process of collecting more input from affected marginalized communities, commit to training staff on distinguishing between political critique and discrimination.
Now let us meet today's guests.
My name is Iman, and I'm a co-founder and organizer with Toronto Palestinian Families. I have 2 kids in the TDSB. One is in high school and one is in middle school.
And that's the Toronto District School Board for all the people outside of Ontario listening.
That's right. Thank you for having us, Jessa.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, Iman. Lev, can you also introduce yourself to everybody here?
My name is Lev Yeager. I'm organizer and founder with Toronto Jewish Families, and I've been active on the Palestinian solidarity several years.
I originally reached out to you folks because of the campaign around the Toronto District School Board. Folks who have been listening to our Rabble Rant series will have an idea of what we're talking about. And let's be clear, this is not the only work that you do. But when I reached, and we'll talk about that campaign, but when I reached out to you, made it clear that it would be beneficial to have both the Toronto Palestinian families on with the Toronto Jewish families. Can you tell me a little bit on how you folks started to work together? I mean, I understand the value of having you on together, and I think it'll be demonstrated as we go through the episode. But how did this collaboration begin?
Well, it started, I think, quite a while back, at 2021, I would say, with the witch hunt and doxing of Desmond Cole and Javier Davila, who are, Javier is an educator in the TDSB, um, and Desmond Cole is presenting on equity, anti-oppression, anti-racism values, and we came together because they were doxxed for speaking on Palestine, and I think as a community, as two communities who are impacted by this, came together and wanted to help and support them through it, and that's kind of how it all started. I think we have the reason we work together is not because we're necessarily Palestinian and Jewish with and that kind of stereotype of, let's Jews and Palestinians come together. It's because we share the same values and we work with the same basis of unity and the same understanding of anti-oppression, anti-racism. This is what brought us together.
We kind of discovered that each of our groups were working, we discovered each other from working on those two issues and found out, oh, there's this other group, at least from our side, we found out, oh, there's a Palestinian group working on this. And it became clear that we could be, that we in our assessment could be more effective if we worked together.
It's funny, not funny, that you came together, in 2021. And even back then, it was just so painfully obvious the anti Palestinian racism and suppression that existed within maybe not this, well, you can tell me, within the school board itself, or at least the communities around the school boards. And I think a lot of people listening will have seen this new battleground of sorts. I mean, I'm sure it's always been a battleground in terms of segregated schools, and there's always been work to do, but it just seems like it's hit another level of organizing. So on top of talking about, why you folks were really talking about these delegations at the Toronto District School Board, we'll get into that, but also just the nature of school boards in Ontario specifically. They don't operate all the same way throughout the country, but it's an interesting point of pressure, I think, that where, some good folks are spending a lot of their time, but then there's a lot of people who have maybe not seen this as a typical battleground or have not dedicated their attention or resources here. And now it's starting to become more clear that very critical work is being done here, and it's not all reactionary, right? So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you folks had been doing between 2021 and when you more formalized after October 7th, 2023? How did that work around what had happened to Desmond and Javier? How did that turn out? Was the board receptive to your work?
I think it's important to say that what we learned from those incidents um, is that there is just not enough education within the Toronto District School Board, not at the trustee level and not at the staff level, for sure. And I think this is kind of where we started mobilizing, in that we wanted to ensure that people had the full picture before, taking sides or trying to figure out, I don't know how to navigate this. I'm not sure. I might be called an anti-Semite if I, say anything, or the self kind of censorship, the fear, really. So we thought if we could start to talk to the board and to the staff about introducing Palestinian material, obviously from an anti-colonial perspective, linking it transnational anti-colonial movements to Canadian anti-colonial movements. How can we start talking about Palestine in the school system so that it's not such a one-sided story and that the narrative is balanced? I think that's kind of where we began. And then realizing through that obviously our stories are interlinked, right? Jewish families and Palestinian families' stories are two sides of the same coin. How do we, ground our work in social justice and equity and move from that point?
Yes, very much so. And we saw that we needed to do work to make the TDSB a place that both Jews and Palestinians could express themselves, and Palestinians could express their identity, and we could talk about Palestine and Israel without being shut down.
At the very least, right? I mean, at the very least, it seems painfully obvious why Palestinian families would see what happened to Desmond Cole and Javier as a threat and needing to be addressed. What was the impetus for Toronto Jewish families to see that as, was that also a trigger point for your community there? And why?
Well, because we were ready, we were all families, parents of kids in the TDSB, and all of us were progressives. That's a mild way to put it. We put leftists, activists mostly. So we were already conscious that we want that there's a lot of pushback, a lot of suppression of solidarity with Palestinians and solidarity with social justice on other issues around blacks and indigenous students and just part of the environment of a colonial society. So because we saw that the fact that we were looking for how can we be effective? Where's the pressure point in society that we as a group can be effective? And we saw that as parents, we could try and make the TDSB a better space that way. Can't change what's happening in the Middle East directly. We're not that powerful. What can we do here to make it better for both Palestinian children and Jewish children within the TDSB?
Can you speak to how that level of suppression harms Jewish people as well?
Yes, every time when people are afraid, like our kids are afraid to speak out around Palestine rights and Palestinian rights. They're afraid, both they're conscious that there's stigma within the Jewish community and suppression within the TDSB. Like they know that the teachers and like they've seen it happen. If they see it happen to a Palestinian student, they learn the lesson for themselves too, right? I mean, that was part of my root motivation for myself, is that I saw I didn't want my kid, to learn that it's okay to treat students that way, to shut them down and shut off their identity and suppress their humanity and caring for their own people and other people's. And I knew it would come around. I knew that if this is how Palestinians get treated, well, Jews are going to get it too. Like there's going to be anti-Semitism to Jews that the system isn't ready to deal with properly. To build on what Lev was saying, is I think the discovery that anti-Palestinian racism is not unique to Palestinians was like a thunderbolt to us. It was like, oh, they're experiencing exactly what we experience. They're experiencing anti-Palestinian racism in the same way, compounded by anti-Semitism, which is so weird, right? And it's like it shouldn't happen at all. And I think we see this also in the boardroom with the trustees, how they also experience anti-Palestinian racism because they have to self-censor. They're afraid of being called anti-Semites, even when they have the facts in front of them. That the fear is real.
Yeah, it's sort of in the way that we discover misogyny harms men as well, right? In the way that it impacts their psyche and expectations and whatnot. But it must be horrifying then to start from that position, that spot of seeing the suppression and knowing you have to act. And you fast forward to where we are now, and I think everybody listening kind of understands where we are right now, and you see this attempt to silence these voices almost being codified. So a report is being submitted to the Toronto District School Board, and it explicitly conflates Jewishness with Zionism and tries to protect Zionism as a marginalized ideology, or whatever the language is that they're using around that. And that's almost, it's realizing all those fears that both of you discussed, especially Lev there. And maybe on paper it doesn't seem that way to the uneducated, right, to read it. But if you could hear the delegations speaking for this particular report recently in the Toronto District School Board, I think you would have no ground to stand on in arguing with Lev on that point, that, Jewish students and Palestinian students have real fears around this, because the racism and hate that was just dripping from the mouths of some of those delegates. I asked Iman before we started recording, were any of them cut off? Like, were any of them found to be violating a code of conduct in that meeting space? I could not imagine holding any kind of meeting and allowing some of that language to fall on the ears of everyone listening. It's horrific. And so if they're facing, I can't play a clip, but I will link a clip in the show notes so folks can get an idea of what I'm talking about. But that must have been really hard for you folks to sit through after you've spent 3 years trying to do this education work. Do you want to talk about how you came to know and then mobilize against this particular report? Like, where did it come from and how did you find out about it?
So this particular report is evidently sort of steered through and managed and created by something called the Jewish Heritage Committee in the TDSB. Over the past couple of years, we carefully inserted 2 of our members into that committee because we saw what that committee has been doing. It's traditionally been tasked with things like running the Jewish Heritage Month events, things that could be innocuous, but as this battle around the Palestinian rights and Zionism heated up, it became anything but benign. So we got an alert from our members that, this report is coming out. We have connections elsewhere that informed us that this meeting, that the TDSB trustees were having a meeting to consider the anti-Semitism strategy, because that's a long-standing part of their anti-hate strategy that they're developing. So there's been lots of build-up and pieces of the puzzle that come together.
So there wasn't previously, or there isn't, an anti-Semitism strategy in place at the TDSB right now. They're trying to create one.
No, there was always one, right, Lev? There is always. In fact, I think it's one of the most robust.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is. Yes, there has been. There's been a lot of Holocaust education of a type that focuses on anti-Semitism, and it existed. They're working on various aspects of what they're now renaming it and calling it anti-hate and I don't remember the rest of the name, strategy. And it's got several components that they're supposed to be developing, including anti-Islamophobia and some other components.
Have they been more reactionary to the work that you've done? Like, is that what has spurred this kind of redefining of anti-Semitism?
Definitely.
Or is this part of kind of standard operating procedure for Zionism right now to entrench this definition anywhere and everywhere?
I think we've seen a correlation between the work that we're doing and this spike in their own activities in trying to redefine what anti-Semitism is, calling it modern forms of anti-Semitism. And I think Lev can speak to that a bit more. But I think the concept is how can we use school policy to basically suppress any and all conversations on Israel as a settler colonial state, which is kind of part of the big issue, not allowing us to talk about settler colonial narratives at all, undoing all the work that the TDSB has been put effort behind on anti-colonial work in Canada and Indigenous rights in Canada. It's like all of that has disappeared just because they want to curb our own conversations on Israel as a settler colonial state. And in doing so, of course, they shut down Palestinian voices, they shut down allied voices, they shut down educators, students who have the right to protest or stand in solidarity. This is how they do it. One of the big themes that came out of the delegations was calling Israel a settler colony is anti-Semitic, basically, because we're denying the link of Jews to the land. And that is not what is happening at all. It's that we're saying Israel in its modern condition is a settler colonial state. That's all it is. And it's a fact. And even facts are disputed. These are historical facts, and they're disputed in an attempt to shut us down. And I think just using the school system, using the systems, the policies and laws are in trying to shut us down is a direct correlation to the work that we've been doing.
Yes, I support what Iman's saying completely, and that it is reactive. We've seen this in both within the TSB and within the greater organizations like CIJA, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, that they're reacting, they're terrified because the monolithic control that they've had over communications and the sort of representation of the Jewish community that they've had in recent years is breaking down. There's starting to be voices like ours speaking up and saying, no, we don't have to support the Israeli government. We don't support its actions. We don't support the settler actions of the Israeli state. And we want them coming from a different position as Jews. And that's terrifying for them. And that's why we get them reacting so with such venom.
Indeed. And using the language of equity to try to do this all. Yes? It's a little ironic.
Very.
That most of these folks likely do not support DEI initiatives, but are using that language of, safe spaces to suppress voices. It's, that's incredibly frustrating when they adopt that language. It becomes very difficult to counter it effectively, but I imagine you folks have been practiced in this. This is not new. Have you seen a large shift in the board because of your work? Like, do you feel like you reached some of those trustees?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because what we felt is that certainly there are many trustees who, I want to say, if not on side, I want to say in the middle somewhere, but only because of fear, not because of fact, not because they're disputing the facts of the case. It's really because of fear of vocally supporting, this anti-colonial, anti-oppressive, anti-racist work. They're afraid of vocalizing, and so some of them will not vote, will abstain or, vote for just to be on the safe side so that they don't get. But I definitely feel like more people have been asking us questions, which I think is a good sign. So often after delegations, we receive questions. If we're there in person, someone will come out and talk to us of the trustees and ask more. So, but the interesting thing is that they don't ask us questions after delegation. As you know, they have about 3 minutes to ask questions. We've almost never had a question from a delegate, unless from a trustee, unless it was about the safety of an incident around children within the school. But we've never had questions, like foundational questions about what it is that and I think it's because there's nothing to ask. There's the questions they have to ask are clarifying questions. And I think what we've been delegating about is absolutely crystal clear. And so there's really nothing to clarify.
When you went into the delegations, the report's coming down, I guess a calendar tells you at some point that it's going to be on the agenda, and you mobilize to this point. Were you expecting them to have so many delegates as well? There was many delegates that spoke against this report. I don't know if you have the numbers breakdown, but there seemed to be almost equally the amount for it, suggesting that the sides had mobilized somewhat equally. Were you expecting what you saw?
We're both there throughout the whole mammoth, Olympic delegation. It was many hours. It was like I think it was like from 4:30 until 11:30 at night. So it was 101 delegates, 44 delegates against the report, and 38, I want to say, for the report. And so, we organized, they called it an orchestrated attack or an orchestrated onslaught or something to that effect. Yes, and what they call orchestrated is just plain old organizing, which is, what people do when they want their voices to be heard. And so I think we expected this. We knew that this would happen. We just went in with our usual delegations. Like, we didn't do anything extra. People were just coming to us and saying, we want to talk, we want to speak up. This is really important. And so I don't know what efforts they went to, but what we did notice is that they had a lot of institutional delegations from CJAs and B'nai B'riths and these folks who have enormous resources, are paid, folks, who come and do this. And they're just moms and dads and teachers and parents, and who want to protect our children. I think it's already a very lopsided situation, and yet we were there in force. So
I expected some amount of backlash because this issue had been building through the TDSB from our previous delegations, and I can see what CJA is communicating, and they were starting to put more attention. I mean, we've even been covered. This issue has been covered in the Israeli press. So the Jerusalem Post and Haaretz have had articles about the struggles within the TSB on this. So it wasn't shocking to me. I was surprised by how many institutional representatives spoke, because not only did CJA and B'nai B'rith have more than one from their organizations, but there were also several rabbis who were heads of rabbinical organizations who were prominent, who I know of these organizations from my experience in the Jewish community, and I thought, wow, they've been recruited to come out. They've been told, you've got to speak. They're employees. They're not doing this on their, they're as Iman said, they're all paid for their work, these people. And so there was massive energy put towards this. Still shocking every time, the venom, the degree of like, it makes me feel like they're so afraid. They're so afraid that they're having to come out with really extreme hostile language, hostile is polite word for it.
It was very difficult. I only made it through a few seconds of one of the worst ones, and I ended at the phrase self-proclaimed Jews is how she was referring to, I suppose, anybody who was anti-Zionist that was delegating that, claimed to be Jewish. And I thought, I've heard enough of that online, but to sit through hours and hours and hours of it is certainly not enjoyable. But I don't want to paint this as like you folks are just reacting. All the work that you do is reacting to this report, but and it is refreshing to hear that people were signing up. You didn't have to do all that much convincing, despite folks likely anticipating blowback, right? If they had witnessed what happened to Desmond and Javier, then they were expecting perhaps some blowback. But do you want to talk about what has happened in the wake of the 13-5 vote in favor of this report? I see in your campaign there is a phone zap later today that I will try to join, but I'll probably be editing this episode. And one of the targets is actually the 5 counselors that voted against the report, to call and thank them. Do you want to talk about why that's just as important as perhaps calling the other trustees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. I think they're extremely brave. Let me put it this way. It's obviously, they've been listening, and gathering information, and I think went with their conscience that given the facts, it's only fair to return this report and say, do a better job at consultations, because the key issue here with this report is that they not all affected parties were contributed to the consultations. So, for example, if you're going to bring Israel into the equation and talk about Israel, then why are you not talking to Palestinian parents and students? For example, why are they not involved? Why are other community members not involved? This affects everybody who's touched by anti-Palestinian racism. And so I think, it's doing that. I think what these five trustees did was in good conscience, saying, well, clearly this report does not represent the affected parties. Otherwise, there would not be so many people here saying this report is not okay. And I think the plan was to pass this report under the radar and have it be the foundational work for the anti-Semitism strategy, which would have effectively denied any criticism of Israel or any Palestinian voice or any pro-Palestinian voice showing solidarity with what is happening right now, an ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing, which has been going on for 76 years. And I think they've been brave, and it's really important to let them know that we stand behind them and will support them and will be there for them should they experience any blowback. And they've been very strong.
We can imagine trustees, what their comment sections are like on their social media feeds today, but also delegates were targeted.
Yeah, we've had typically one of the several what feels dramatic um, ways in which there was a letter written by a group of educators, people within the TDSB, Jews, who had self-identified as Jews, to write a letter on pointing out the terrible aspects of this report and the dangers to free speech and human rights and education. And those people who signed have been doxxed, have been outed online, have been called out, and in fact, there's a campaign to have them punished. That's just one example. And they're vulnerable because they are TDSB employees. So they have a public face and they are vulnerable to discipline. Part of what we have to consider is how to support each other through these attacks, so that we realize that we need to thank them, to strengthen each other, to strengthen them in the face of efforts to call for their resignation, for the chair's resignation. There have been calls for that.
You mean the chair that didn't shut down those racist people? That chair?
I mean, you know what? I mean, this is classic bullying techniques, right? Strong bully, who has, doesn't face any repercussions because they have reach and power and whatever, and they try to bully, and this is the tactic: bullying, shaming, trying to shame and undermine people's work. This is how they do it, and this is how they think they can continue to do it. But people don't fall for it anymore. People understand that these are just lashings out of people who are desperate.
There were explicit calls during the delegations by other delegators saying, condemning the chair for allowing us to speak, for allowing our voices to be even heard as delegates. That existed. That was said. So they condemned the chair even for allowing our delegations to appear for us to discuss this openly.
Because they have to affirm that position, right? That constant position that anything you speak is anti-Semitic, right? If they allow you to say anti-Zionist phrases or arguments, they're allowing you to break this code of conduct that they're trying to set up. And, they hold that line. You were talking before we recorded, I thought it was very interesting, and it's not like it's the first time I've heard of a group doing it, but that you face such attempts to silence your work that you feel the need to vet your members against the chance of, or, the attempts to infiltrate your organization to thwart its efforts. Do you want to talk about that, and how you don't necessarily have to give us details how you do it, but how that weighs on you?
Well, I'll tell you about the rationale for it. I think it's really important. First of all, as a community of Toronto Jewish families, Toronto Palestinian families together, there is incredible trust and understanding that helps us keep each other safe, basically. And so we do this because we want to keep each other safe. We don't want our work to be thwarted by people who we'll take our words out of context. Or so imagine the level of trust that we have between us. We are able to say anything we feel in front of each other because we understand each other's intentions and understand each other's hearts. And that is a precious space that we want to keep. We don't want to have that feeling that there's someone amongst us who cannot be trusted. Nothing that we're doing is secret. Okay, let me be clear. We're out in the open. We're a bunch of parents and teachers and educators and students who want to be have a sense of belonging and a sense of, and all we're asking for is fairness. Can we have the same amount of attention? Can our pain be as important as other people's pain? Can our feelings of marginalization be the same as somebody? We're not even asking for more, we're asking for the same. When we vet our members, it's really because we want to preserve that safe space, and we want us to all be comfortable and not have to watch our words and sanitize our language either, because I think that's another piece where we want to be able to just be honest with each other.
Right, and this isn't a new phenomenon. I've seen this in solidarity work, both within 48 Palestine, Israel, and in Canada. To make a space of trust is in the face of the kind of fear mongering that is put out. So they're saying to us, "Oh, you as Jews, you must be anti-Semites if you can work with Palestinians." That's part of the message, that you must be self-hating Jews. So we need to find a space where it's a safe, we have to trust each other.
Do you ever get accused of not being inclusive for that? Like, is there a tax on that vetting or that need to maybe say no to some people?
We've never run into that. We haven't had to do a lot of saying no to people. It's more of how we say yes.
Yeah, and I think we've never had an issue saying to someone, no, you can't join us. All we ask for is, that they sign a basis of unity, read through our basis of unity and check a box to say, I agree with this. And then we just ask for a reference so that it's, we're snowballing, we're snowballing because we want, again, that safety. We want people to feel secure that we are amongst friends and we are amongst like-minded people. It doesn't mean that we always agree on everything. That's a myth, but it means that we can deliberate and discuss safely and not feel like someone has an agenda that is trying to thwart what we believe in.
I wonder if you could speak to the balance, like how you strike that balance of creating a community that is safe and that you can be productive in, but also, like you described earlier, being able to create a place for everyone to exist. Because in this moment, lots of people will flock to you, right? Or have, because a lot of people are looking for a way to plug in, to help, to do something. And you folks grew quite quickly once I think it became clear to the community what you were doing. And, October 7th set everybody into a different level of prioritization and action. How are you able to create a space for everyone to exist, regardless of how much they can, contribute? You said you were 250 Palestinian families. Like, that's a lot of people.
Well, just to clarify, it's 250 families. Not all are Palestinian, I would say. I don't have the latest numbers or what the proportions are, but certainly we have, I think, probably a majority of Palestinians or a mix of both. This is, our movement is a testament to that. And so, a lot of Palestinian people want to get involved. They don't know how to get involved. And there's space for everyone in this movement, right? So it doesn't matter what your ideas might be, as long as we agree on some basics. If you read our basis of unity and if you read some of our values, you'll see that we won't accept any racism, any anti-gay rights, anti-LGBTQ, any of that. We're against any form of hate and discrimination. And I think this is really the foundational piece. Whoever wants to contribute can. In our sign up form, we ask folks, if you want to contribute, how can you contribute? How much time can you give? And if they have specific skills they'd like to add, they will join us. But it's fine. I mean, for me, even just showing up at a meeting or signing a petition is a contribution. And I think that's pretty precious for us. And just knowing that we have people's backing, we have their back and they have ours, I think is really precious.
Without revealing too much, how will you harness the energy that you've created around these delegations? How will you take that forward? Because now they've adopted or they've accepted, received this report. Your work is not done, right?
Yeah, our work is not done. I think we have to watch very closely. Like I said, I think they were planning to pass this under the radar. Now it's no longer that we saw the TDSB backpedal, big time. Even the director of education, who is the new director of education, said something like, "We will go back and do further consultations." Why would you present a report that was incomplete, is the question. So we think that there was a lot of backpedaling done to when realizing that there was also lack of clarity in their own communication to the public. That in terms of harnessing the movement, honestly, it's really kind of been self-fueling. Like we've seen folks who reached out to us many months ago and said something like, well, I've never delegated. I'm too shy. I'm too nervous, to do it. And then this time around, they kind of like, I want to delegate, and it's really quite incredible to see people fueling each other and encouraging each other. There is no wrong or right answer here. Whoever wants to participate can find a way. We have folks who are supporting us in all kinds of work in the background, who may not ever want to delegate, and that's fine too.
And you folks aren't the only group working on this as well, right? I've seen independent Jewish voices at least tweet about this and relay some facts, as well as Labor for Palestine. They have their own Ontario Education Workers division. And so, yeah, it's good to know that not only are you not alone in terms of organizations, but folks are still flocking to you. And we will be sure in the show notes to share your contact information in case there's other Toronto families that want to contribute. Have you been working with other school boards? Like I'm up in the York Region School Board. I don't want this happening here either. Are you finding that people are proactively mobilizing the way that you did in 2021, not waiting for a report like this to come down the pipeline? Because I imagine you're expecting this in other school boards. They're not just going to target Toronto.
Yes, we do collaborate with other school boards, I want to say other community members and other school boards. We do have, we're very proud of kind of our another chapter of ours called Peel Palestinian Families, and we've just started organizing together in a more cohesive manner. But these folks are doing incredible work. Building community, I think, is number one, and they're focusing on building their community right now. And I think they have a town hall coming up soon. So it's really fantastic to see this growing. We have interest in other provinces as well, and it's something that I think is happening organically. Nobody's soliciting anybody. It's people are coming to us and saying, "How can we help? How can we do this where we're at? How can we start this here?" And we are more than happy to meet and give them some of our tips. We're by far imperfect. We were not perfect. Like we tried. We've been doing this by trial and error, learning how to build community and organizing. We have veteran organizers in our group who've been doing this for a long time, and it's really phenomenal to learn from them as well. But we don't pretend to know it all, but we just tell them what has worked for us, and we say that you have to, you find what works for you, and we're there to support you.
With so many groups realizing the need to intervene at the school board level in terms of how, I mean, there's no one going to the Minister of Education right now trying to explain what we need in our schools because they're not listening. But I think there's hope that at the local level, work can be done in the school boards. Is there anything unique to this work that you would share with other people? Things you can share openly in terms of what has worked for you in trying to intervene, or what you would not even spend any more time on, what did not work at all?
We've been really successful in just building the momentum within our community. In terms of activities, I would say it's just being true to our own mission. We don't really. I don't think that our job is to try to thwart or let's say try to react to what the other side is doing. That's not. We don't really care much about that. It's really about things that affect us directly. Why it has been successful is just because we want, again, we're asking for fairness, and people respond to that and say, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. How can I help? What we think will not work, because, and that this is why we've not gone that route, is to try to go through the back channels with government and with high officials and things like that. That's not our space. We're not a lobby group. As I said, we don't have enormous resources. Our resources are our people, the people who join us and want to work with us and move things with us. I think this is tremendously powerful, and certainly a lot more. It will have a longer life, just be more effective in the long run, because it will continue to grow, and it's not going to move depending on the political climate. It's going to stay true to itself, irrespective of who wins the next elections. It just, we're staying our course. I think this is what has worked for us.
There's, just like in all many other struggles around indigenous rights, around capitalist oppression, around racism against blacks, against that many people disagree with this. Many people of our own communities who are scared, who are oppressed, who are disadvantaged, will be emboldened and be strengthened by us stepping forward. And then they step forward too, and we each strengthen each other. I feel like this isn't something that's going to end with just the TDSB or one vote or this vote or that vote. It's a long struggle, and we strengthen each other by being part of the struggle.
Now, both of you have brought up voting and elections, so I would be remiss not to ask whether or not you think intervening in some way in the next round of school trustee elections, which sometimes are uncontested, not always. I think, like we said before, it's gearing up as a battleground with the resources that you have, and also balancing that with the amount of people that are now so vested in this. Will you attempt to run candidates in the next trustee election, or intervene somehow so that maybe so much work doesn't have to be done from the top, so much education work? Because 13 counselors voting that report in, despite the lack of consultation, is a signal that we need maybe better trustees as well.
We do think about that, but I don't think that we have capacity to run these enormous, kind of campaigns to support one particular. But I know that we are always looking for candidates to support. So if there are folks who are running, we get behind them and we will support them in any way that we can. I don't think that we are the kingmakers at this point, if you know what I mean. But we'll certainly support those who want to get behind the movement and have the right politics. We will do it. We will mobilize our communities to support them for sure.
Well, I think you're not going to be alone there in wanting to interject in some way. So my hope is that groups like yours, groups that have mobilized around trans kids' rights and LGBTQ rights within the school board, and the folks that were already doing anti-police work, getting police out of schools, and anti-black racism, that all of them can work together to recognize that maybe together they are the kingmakers, that our social movements perhaps should be the deciders of the electorate and not capital. It's just those resources are so dang hard to come by. I know there's going to be people that, just don't have the means to delegate or get involved. So they've just got a million other things, especially if they've got kids in the school board, right? And so any kind of means of support, but also keeping this in mind when we go to vote for school trustees. I don't think we put as much thought into picking our candidates or, mobilizing support. We're very focused on, at that time, it's usually the mayor's race or your city councilor's race. These are municipal elections. And so it's like there's 3 elections almost in one when this happens. And school trustees or the regional counselors, sometimes you do see them uncontested on ballots, like maybe not in the city of Toronto. So this is more for folks outside of the larger boards. But it is, if you're ever thinking of getting involved in politics, this is the one space where you don't need the support of a party, that you can do quite a lot with very little. So, when you're hearing these horror stories, and you can get involved with these organizations, but you can also think about these school boards a little bit differently. So we'll pair this episode with another one we did where folks were fighting out in Alberta in terms of getting trans rights recognized and, codified within schools, and also reacting to attacks on those rights within the school board. So,
it could also be that some of the trustees who don't have a lot of clarity on this issue are too afraid to ask questions because they're not sure what to ask or how to frame it. I mean, don't forget, there's a lot of ignorance still about this issue, and the dominant voices are in their ear, right? So oftentimes the question is not asked because they're not sure how to ask it, and not appear ignorant, or so it could be that as well. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
I don't normally like to be partisan, but I did notice that at least 2 of the 5 counselors that voted against this report are deep NDP insiders. I would call them inner circle NDPers, for sure. So it is promising that, you can have people in place, but it would have been nice to perhaps had a champion within the trustees. I know you spoke, Iman, that your delegations were so crystal clear that there was very little questions that could be asked, but I think it would have made a difference if perhaps in the room it felt like there was a champion amongst those trustees, that there was not complete neutrality, but baby steps, baby steps. And surely they heard all these delegations and maybe they voted within a small time frame, but allow this to percolate within them and the reactions percolate. And although you don't want to expose people to a lot of what we heard, at the same time, it was really mask off moments for a lot of those delegates, especially the ones that threw their speech out the window and then just let their racism come out, like just spilling out. But you would love to allow the broader audience to just soak that in, like make them sit through those hours of delegations to hear both the clarity coming from folks trying to advocate for better and the open anti-Palestinian racism that came out, which is the whole, driver of your work to begin with, right? It validates your need to keep doing what you're doing, right? Because you just keep bumping up against the same kind of racism that kids in school are going to be experiencing, right? I think the most heartbreaking part of this report and its possible implications is to think that there would be a Palestinian, or there will be a Palestinian student within the school board who cannot advocate for a free Palestine. Even me as a pro-Palestinian activist, that would be horrific for me. Not a Palestinian, not someone who has family, like just that closeness. I know we all feel like the urgency right now, but it's just this next level. And for them to say, or to be disciplined, I mean, at the onset of the most recent genocide in Gaza, we saw students in some school boards being sent home for wearing a keffiyeh. That was addressed immediately. The backlash was appropriate. And so I'm not sure if that's still happening, but it has the potential to happen under these kind of new definitions, right? And new ways of framing what anti-Semitism is. It wouldn't be a stretch to then ban the keffiyeh or other symbols of Palestinian liberation or just of Palestine. The recognition of Palestine in itself sometimes becomes this contested ground to Zionists. So it's I'm very appreciative of your work going up against this, despite all of the viciousness that you have to go up against. But to hear that you build communities in spite of this is exactly what pisses them off. So good work. Is there any kind of parting words that you would like to leave with the audience?
I would say get in touch if you want to support or help out, or just be part of this movement that is growing.
To take heart that the struggle can be seen daunting at times.
Yeah, we welcome thoughts and ideas,
that we are
just, join us.
How vehemently the opposition is lashing out is a sign of their fear of their losing their traction, their position of dominance, and the struggle. We come together and we will win.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.